On the cold, quiet night of April 11th, 1989, in the small town of Columbus, Mississippi, a chilling silence settled over St. Clair Street. The neighborhood was fast asleep, wrapped in the deep darkness of midnight. But inside a small, weathered apartment, a 18-year-old teenage mother named Sabrina Butler was living through a nightmare that no parent should ever experience. Sabrina was sitting on the edge of her bed, holding her 9-month-old baby boy, Walter. Just minutes earlier, Walter had been sleeping peacefully in his crib. But suddenly, something went terribly, tragically wrong. The baby's skin turned pale, his breathing became shallow and ragged, and his small body went completely limp in his mother's arms. Panicked and terrified, 18-year-old Sabrina tried frantically to wake her baby. She called out his name, rubbed his chest, and tried to perform basic CPR techniques she had seen on television, placing her hands over his chest in a desperate attempt to force air into his tiny lungs. When Walter remained unresponsive, Sabrina ran out into the cold night air, screaming for help down the empty residential street. A neighbor, startled by the screaming, rushed out of her house and immediately called emergency services. Within minutes, the quiet neighborhood was lit up by the flashing red and blue lights of an approaching ambulance. Paramedics bolted up the front steps, snatched the lifeless body of baby Walter, and began emergency resuscitation efforts in the back of the moving vehicle as they sped toward the local emergency room at the Golden Triangle Regional Medical Center. Sabrina sat in the passenger seat of the ambulance, her hands trembling violently, her heart pounding against her ribs. She was terrified, confused, and praying for a miracle. She kept repeating the same words over and over to the paramedics. "Please save my baby. Please." He stopped breathing. At the hospital, doctors and emergency room nurses swarmed the trauma bay. For nearly 45 minutes, medical staff performed advanced life support procedures, injecting medications and applying chest compressions. But despite their best efforts, at 1:15 a.m., the lead physician looked at the clock, sighed, and officially pronounced 9-month-old Walter dead. When the doctor walked out into the waiting room to deliver the catastrophic news, Sabrina collapsed onto the floor, weeping hysterically. Her firstborn child, the center of her universe, was gone in an instant. At this exact moment, a medical emergency turned into something far more sinister. Instead of providing grief counseling or giving the grieving young mother space to mourn her child, hospital staff noticed unusual bruises on the infant's chest and abdomen. What the medical staff did not understand, or refused to investigate, was that those bruises were the direct result of Sabrina's frantic, untrained attempts to perform CPR on her non-responsive infant in the bedroom. Before the sun even rose over Mississippi on April 12, 1989, hospital administration picked up the phone and dialed the police. Within 20 minutes, 2 homicide detectives from the Columbus Police Department arrived at the emergency room. They did not view Sabrina Butler as a grieving teenage mother who had just lost her baby. They saw a suspect. While still covered in her child's blood and tears, 18-year-old Sabrina Butler was placed into the back of a police cruiser and driven to the Columbus Police Headquarters. She was escorted down a long, dimly lit corridor into a small, windowless interrogation room. The room contained only a scuffed wooden table, 3 folding chairs, and a harsh fluorescent light flickering overhead. Sabrina was exhausted, traumatized, and entirely alone. She was a young woman from a low-income background who had not completed high school. She had no understanding of her constitutional rights, no legal representation present, and no adult relative in the room to protect her. 2 veteran homicide detectives sat across from her. Almost immediately, the tone of the room turned hostile. The officers did not ask open-ended questions about what had happened that night. Instead, they slammed photos of baby Walter's body onto the wooden table. They accused Sabrina of losing her temper, beating her child, and intentionally causing his death. When Sabrina, sobbing uncontrollably, insisted that she loved her baby and had only pressed on his chest to try and wake him up when he stopped breathing, the detectives raised their voices. They told her that her story made no sense. They lied to her, a tactic commonly used in police interrogations, claiming that doctors had already confirmed that the baby died from intentional physical abuse. "We know you did it, Sabrina," one detective shouted, leaning close to her face. "If you don't confess right now, you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison, or worse, you're going to face the death penalty." For hours, the psychological pressure mounted. Sabrina was deprived of sleep, denied food, and repeatedly told that if she just signed a written statement explaining how she pressed on the baby's chest, she would be allowed to go home to her family. Confused Exhausted and desperately wanting to escape the terrifying interrogation room, 18-year-old Sabrina signed a typed statement drafted entirely by the police officers. The statement was worded in a way that made her frantic CPR attempts sound like an intentional admission of child abuse. The moment her pen hit the paper, the detective's demeanor changed instantly. They pulled her hands behind her back, snapped iron handcuffs around her wrists, and formally placed her under arrest for capital murder. She was not allowed to go home. She was processed, photographed for a mugshot, and marched into a cold concrete jail cell. While Sabrina Butler sat in a jail cell facing charges that carried the death penalty, the state of Mississippi initiated its forensic investigation. The crucial piece of evidence that the prosecution planned to use to convict her was the official autopsy report. The autopsy was assigned to Dr. Stephen Hain, a controversial medical examiner who performed thousands of autopsies across Mississippi, despite widespread criticism from forensic medical societies regarding his workload and methods. Dr. Hain performed the post-mortem examination on baby Walter. During the autopsy, he observed internal injuries, including a small tear in the infant's internal organs and bruising on the chest wall. Without investigating the baby's medical history or considering the physical mechanics of aggressive, amateur CPR performed by a panicked adult on a 9-month-old infant, Dr. Hain rushed to a definitive conclusion. He declared the manner of death to be homicide. In his official autopsy report, Dr. Hain wrote that the injuries were consistent with direct, intentional, blunt force trauma, specifically claiming that the baby had been punched or forcefully struck in the abdomen. This report became the bedrock of the state's capital murder case. Prosecutors had a signed police statement from Sabrina admitting she pressed on the baby's chest, and they now had an official state medical examiner stating that the baby died from violent abuse. However, state officials completely ignored critical context. Baby Walter had a history of chronic respiratory issues and had been brought to local clinics multiple times in the weeks leading up to his death for breathing complications. None of these medical records were reviewed by Dr. Hain, nor were they requested by the police detectives. The prosecution had built its entire narrative around a single rigid theory. A young mother had lost her temper and murdered her infant child. In March 1990, 19-year-old Sabrina Butler stood trial in Lowndes County Circuit Court. The courtroom was packed with local residents, journalists, and curious onlookers. The media painted Sabrina as a cold, heartless mother who had committed the ultimate crime against her own flesh and blood. The prosecution's legal strategy was aggressive and emotionally charged. District attorneys opened their case by displaying large, full-color autopsy photographs of baby Walter in front of the jury. They called the arresting detectives to the stand, who read Sabrina's coerced statement aloud to the court, emphasizing every detail to make her CPR efforts sound like a brutal assault. Then came the prosecution's star witness, Dr. Stephen Hain. Taking the witness stand in a professional suit, Dr. Hain projected absolute authority. He testified under oath that baby Walter's internal injuries could only have been caused by severe, intentional physical abuse. He explicitly ruled out CPR as a potential cause of the injuries, telling the jury that CPR could never generate enough force to cause internal tearing in an infant. Sabrina's court-appointed defense attorney was severely underfunded and unprepared. He failed to hire an independent forensic pathologist to evaluate Dr. Hain's claims. He failed to subpoena baby Walter's medical records, showing his prior respiratory hospital visits. And he failed to call medical experts on CPR injuries to counter the state's narrative. Sabrina took the witness stand in her own defense. Through tears, she tried to explain to the jury that she loved her son, that she had never struck him, and that she was only trying to save his life when she found him unresponsive in his crib. But her emotional testimony could not overcome the authoritative claims of the state's medical expert and the written police statement. On March 14, 1990, after brief deliberations, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of capital murder committed during the commission of child abuse. At 19 years old, Sabrina Butler became the first woman in Mississippi history to be sentenced to death by lethal injection. The judge pronounced the sentence without emotion, ordering that she be transported directly to the Mississippi State Penitentiary at Parchman to await her execution. Sabrina Butler was transported to the infamous Parchman Penitentiary, a sprawling, high-security prison farm located in the Mississippi Delta. She was placed in a small, concrete cell on death row, isolated from the general prison population. The conditions inside death row were brutal. The summers were stiflingly hot, with temperatures inside the non-air-conditioned cells rising above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, while the winters were bitterly cold. Sabrina spent 23 hours a day locked inside her cell, staring at gray cinder block walls, listening to the echoing clangs of steel doors and the cries of other inmates. At 19 years old, while her peers were going to college, starting careers, and raising families, Sabrina was living under a constant sentence of death. Every single day, she woke up knowing that the state of Mississippi was preparing to execute her. Despite the crushing depression and fear, Sabrina refused to give up hope. She spent hours in her cell writing letters to legal organizations, civil rights groups, and appellate lawyers, maintaining her complete innocence and begging for someone to look at the medical evidence in her case. Back home, her family was devastated. Her mother spent every spare dollar she had traveling to Parchman Penitentiary for brief, 15-minute visits through thick plexiglass windows. They could not touch, hold hands, or hug. Years began to slip away. As 1990 turned into 1991 and 1992, Sabrina watched her legal appeals wind their way through the state court system, with local courts repeatedly upholding her conviction and sentence. It seemed that the door to freedom was permanently locked, and her date with the lethal injection table was approaching fast. In late 1992, a breakthrough occurred. Sabrina's case caught the attention of dedicated appellate attorneys and forensic specialists associated with capital defense organizations. They recognized that the original trial had been marred by severe, ineffective assistance of counsel and dubious medical testimony. A team of independent medical experts, including renowned pediatric pathologists, was recruited to conduct a comprehensive, independent re-examination of all forensic evidence in the case. When these independent experts reviewed baby Walter's original medical records, tissue samples, and autopsy files, they uncovered a shocking truth that completely demolished the prosecution's trial narrative. Undiagnosed medical condition. Baby Walter had suffered from a severe, underlying kidney disease and congenital respiratory issues that had gone entirely unnoticed and undiagnosed during his short life. Natural cause of death. The baby had not died from physical abuse or trauma. He had died from sudden, acute medical complications related to his kidney condition and respiratory failure. CPR-induced postmortem marks. The internal marks and tissue tears observed during the autopsy were completely consistent with energetic, untrained CPR performed on a tiny infant body, exactly as Sabrina had described from the very beginning. The independent experts concluded that Dr. Stephen Haynes' original autopsy findings were fundamentally flawed, scientifically inaccurate, and represented a catastrophic misdiagnosis of a natural infant death. In 1993, Sabrina's appellate attorneys filed an emergency petition before the Mississippi Supreme Court, presenting the new medical findings and arguing that Sabrina had been convicted on scientifically false testimony while being deprived of a competent defense. In August 1993, the Mississippi Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling. Recognizing the severe flaws in the original trial and the newly presented medical evidence, the court officially vacated Sabrina Butler's capital murder conviction and death sentence, ordering a new trial. In December 1995, the retrial commenced in Lowndes County. This time, the courtroom dynamic was completely different. Sabrina was represented by skilled, fully prepared defense attorneys who presented a formidable medical defense. The defense called world-renowned pediatric expert Dr. Gerald Gowett to the witness stand. Dr. Gowett systematically disassembled the state's original case, testifying under oath that baby Walter died of natural causes related to a severe internal medical condition, and that the physical marks were the direct result of CPR attempts. When the prosecution attempted to rely on their original theories, the defense presented undisputed medical records demonstrating that there was zero evidence of intentional child abuse. After hearing the complete, scientifically accurate evidence, the jury deliberated for only a short period before returning to the courtroom. On December 17, 1995, the jury foreperson stood up and read the official verdict. Not guilty on all counts. Sabrina Butler collapsed into her attorney's arms, sobbing uncontrollably, this time tears of sheer relief. After spending more than 6 years in prison, including over 5 years on death row as an innocent mother, she was officially exonerated of all charges. On the evening of December 17, 1995, 25-year-old Sabrina Butler walked out of the courthouse doors into the cool night air as a free woman. She had entered the judicial system as a terrified 18-year-old girl. She emerged as a resilient woman who had survived the horrors of death row. Sabrina became the very first woman in the history of the United States to be fully exonerated from death row. Following her release, Sabrina dedicated her life to advocacy and criminal justice reform. She joined the Board of Witness to Innocence, an organization composed of exonerated death row survivors, traveling across the United States, Europe, and Australia to speak publicly about the dangers of false confessions, bad forensic science, and the death penalty. She co-authored books, addressed law schools, and testified before state legislatures, urging lawmakers to pass mandatory recording laws for police interrogations and to establish strict scientific oversight for state medical examiners. The tragic story of Sabrina Butler serves as a powerful, permanent reminder of the devastating consequences of rushed police investigations and unverified forensic science. It highlights how easily a grieving parent can be transformed into a target when system checks fail. Above all, Sabrina's story is an enduring monument to human strength. A story of a mother who lost her child, lost her freedom, faced the threat of execution, but never gave up fighting until the truth finally set her free.